Night on the Powder River pit feels too big. The floodlights turn the coal black and shiny, the wind crawls under your coat, and every sound is metal and dust. I was idling my haul truck when I saw it. One small yellow light up on the high wall. Not an LED, not a headlamp. A warm old glow, like a lantern cupped in a hand. It bobbed once, as if someone up there was waving me in. I killed the engine. The world went quiet, except for the cables ticking in the cold. My radio hissed in my ear, then gave 3 soft knocks, like knuckles on the door. I climbed down, boots grinding grit, and followed the light to the ladder. Halfway up, I stopped. In the coal dust on the rung above mine, a fresh handprint waited, same size as my glove, pressed deep and wet, but turned the wrong way, like whoever left it had been hanging upside down. At the top, the lamp was closer than it should have been, floating just past the edge of the wall where there was nothing to stand on. The coal face creaked. Pebbles skittered into the dark. I took 1 step back. The light winked out. In the sudden black, something breathed beside my ear, cold and slow. And when I looked down, a second handprint appeared next to my boot, forming itself in the dust like a finger writing from underneath. That was 3 months ago. My name is Caleb Winters, and I've been hauling coal out of the Eagle Butte mine for 2 years now. Before that, I was fixing transmissions at Decker's Garage in Gillette, scraping together rent money, and watching my savings disappear into truck payments. When Cloud Peak Energy posted openings for night shift operators, starting at $28 an hour, I didn't hesitate. The divorce papers were fresh. My ex-wife had moved back to Denver with our daughter, and I needed something that paid enough to cover child support and still leave me breathing room. Wyoming coal country doesn't offer many second chances, but the mines do. You show up, you work hard, you don't ask questions about the guys who quit without notice, or the equipment that breaks down in ways that don't make engineering sense. Most of the crew comes from somewhere else. Montana ranches that went under, North Dakota oil fields that played out, Nebraska farms sold to agribusiness. We're all running from something, towards something, or just running. The mine sits 23 miles northeast of Wright, down a gravel road that turns to washboard in the rain. During day shift, you can see the drag line from Highway 59, a massive yellow crane that strips overburden like peeling skin from an apple. At night, it looks like a sleeping dinosaur, cables draped across its boom, warning lights blinking slow and red. What I didn't know when I signed on was that night shift comes with its own set of protocols, not safety regulations. Everyone learns those in orientation. These are different rules, older ones, passed down crew to crew like ghost stories that happen to be true. Jake Morrison, the shift supervisor, handed me a folded piece of paper on my first night. "Read these," he said. "Learn them. Don't ask me why." Jake Morrison was 43 and looked 60. His hard hat was scarred white from flying rock, and his left hand was missing the ring finger. Dragline cable, he told me later, back in '09. He'd been running night shifts since the mine opened, and something about the way other operators watched him told me he'd earned every gray hair. 7 rules, he said, smoothing the paper on his clipboard. Been the same 7 for as long as anyone remembers. Follow them. You'll do fine. Break them. He shrugged. Well, we haven't had anyone break them in a while. The rules were handwritten in blue ink, photocopied so many times the edges had gone soft. Never work alone past midnight. Always keep your partner in radio contact. If you hear your name called from the pit bottom after 2 a.m., do not respond. Do not look down. When the dragline bucket scrapes 3 times against the high wall, stop all equipment for 5 minutes. Count them out loud. The old conveyor belt runs by itself sometimes. Let it run. Do not try to shut it down. If your headlamp dims without cause, replace the batteries immediately. Dark spots move. Never enter the maintenance shed between 3:17 and 3:23 a.m. The door will be unlocked. Do not go in. If you see a man in a company hard hat walking the rim road at night, wave once. Only once. He's been here longer than any of us. I read through them twice. This some kind of initiation thing? Jake's expression didn't change. Nope. Just good advice. He pointed across the pit to where Danny Yazzie was positioning his haul truck near the loading zone. Danny there started same time as you. Ask him tomorrow morning how his first week went. The night air carried diesel fumes and the distant groan of machinery. Our headlamps carved narrow cones through the darkness as we walked the perimeter, Jake showing me the radio checkpoints and safety stations. The pit stretched out below us like a wound in the earth, 300 feet deep, half a mile across, with roads spiraling down the walls like a concrete maze. Why these specific rules? I asked. Because they work. Jake stopped at the edge of the high wall. See that conveyor down there? Built in '94. Company shut it down in '98 when they expanded the pit. Should be dead machinery by now. Motors pulled out, belt cut up for scrap. But some nights, you can hear it running, smooth as butter, like it's moving coal that isn't there. I looked down. The old conveyor was a dark skeleton of steel framework, belt sagging between rollers. And the maintenance shed? That's where Bobby Krensky used to work. Kept the haul trucks running, good with hydraulics. One night, must have been 5 years ago, Bobby went into that shed around 3:20. Found him the next morning sitting at his workbench, tools laid out neat. Still warm. Heart attack, they said. But Bobby was 28, ran marathons. Jake turned away from the pit. Shed's been unlocked every night since. Company changed the lock twice, always opens itself back up. We reached my assigned truck, a Caterpillar 789C with Montana plates, yellow paint, chipped down to primer. The cab smelled like coffee in Copenhagen, and the radio crackled with static between the other operators' voices. Winters, Mrs. Dispatch, you copy? I keyed the mic. Copy, dispatch. Team up with Yazzie for tonight. He'll show you the routes. Danny's voice came through clear. Meet me at the scale house, new guy. We'll start easy. As I climbed into the cab, Jake knocked on my door. One more thing, he said. These rules, they're not suggestions. Company doesn't know about them. Insurance doesn't cover them, and they're not in any safety manual. But they keep people alive. You understand? I nodded. Good. And Winters? That light you saw 3 months ago, up on the rim? That was just someone's headlamp. Happens all the time. Play tricks on your eyes out here. But as he walked away, I caught him looking up at the exact spot where I'd seen that warm yellow glow. The spot where the handprints had formed themselves in the dust. The radio hissed. Danny's voice. You coming, partner? I started the engine. The truck's headlights swept across the loading zone as I shifted into gear, and for just a moment, I thought I saw something move near the old conveyor. A shadow that walked upright, keeping pace with the belt that hadn't run in over 20 years. On my way, I told Danny. Time to see what night shift was really about. Hi, everyone. Before we move forward, I have something exciting to tell you. Many of you asked for stories without the strange rules, so I created a brand new channel just for that. It's called Mr. Grimm Archive. The link is in the description, or you can click the card above. I think you'll really enjoy it. So check it out whenever you want some more exciting types of stories. Also, I hope you're enjoying the 2 uploads a day. Let me know in the comments if you like some stories from your location. Now, let's continue with today's story. Danny Yazzie had been hauling coal for 4 years, ever since the reservation's casino expansion fell through and left him without construction work. He drove with the confidence of someone who knew every pothole and washout on the haul roads, one hand on the wheel, the other holding a thermos of coffee that never seemed to empty. "First rule's the easiest," he said over the radio as our trucks descended the spiral road into the pit. "Stay in contact. Radio check every 30 minutes, no exceptions. Lost a guy named Pete Kowalski 2 winters back. Radio went quiet during the storm. Found his truck the next morning, engine still running, but Pete was gone. Footprints led to the pit wall and just stopped." My truck groaned under its own weight as I navigated the switchbacks. The headlights revealed layers of coal and sandstone, striped like old bacon. At the bottom, the world felt compressed, walls rising on all sides, the night sky reduced to a narrow ribbon of stars. What happened to Pete? Nobody knows, but his truck was parked right next to the old conveyor. You know, the one that runs by itself sometimes. We loaded our first haul at the primary crusher. 150 tons of coal dumped into each truck bed with a sound like thunder. The loader operator, a guy named Hank with a graying mustache, gave us the thumbs up and waved us toward the exit ramp. That's when I heard it. 3 sharp scrapes, metal on stone, echoing from somewhere above us. The sound carried across the pit like fingernails drawn down a chalkboard, long and deliberate. Danny's voice crackled through the radio. "Stop your truck!" Now. I hit the brakes. The coal settled in the bed with a whisper of sliding rock. What was that? Dragline bucket. Rule 3, count out loud. I'll hear you on the radio. 5 minutes, starting now. The scraping came again, then once more. 3 times, just like the rule said. 1 Mississippi, 2 Mississippi, I began, watching the digital clock on my dashboard. The pit felt different now, like something vast was holding its breath. The usual sounds, distant machinery, wind through the cables, had faded to nothing. 3 Mississippi, 4 Mississippi. Danny's truck sat 50 yards ahead of mine, hazard lights blinking amber. Through my windshield, I could see him in his cab, head turned toward the high wall, where the dragline waited in darkness. 15 Mississippi, 16 Mississippi. The dragline was a mammoth thing, 4 million pounds of steel and cable, its boom stretching 300 feet across the pit. During day shift, it moved with surprising grace for something so large, scooping overburden and placing it with surgical precision. At night, it sat motionless, boom lowered, bucket resting on the coal seam like a sleeping animal. 47 Mississippi, 48 Mississippi. I found myself staring at that bucket. In the wash of my headlights, it looked different somehow. Not quite where it should be. Had it been angled that way when we drove past? The curved steel seemed to gleam wetly, as if someone had hosed it down. But there was no water here, just dust and coal and the dry Wyoming wind. 90 Mississippi, 91 Mississippi. A new sound joined my counting, a rhythmic clicking, like boot heels on concrete. It seemed to come from above, from the rim road that circled the pit. I craned my neck to look up, but saw only the edge of the high wall cutting across the stars. 120 Mississippi, 121 Mississippi. The clicking stopped. In the sudden quiet, I heard Danny's breathing through the radio, steady and controlled. He'd been through this before. 2 minutes down, he said softly. Don't look at the drag line bucket, just keep counting. But I couldn't help myself. The bucket had moved. Not much, maybe 6 inches to the left, but I was certain it hadn't been positioned that way before. The steel lip pointed toward my truck now, like an open mouth. 240 Mississippi, 241 Mississippi. My headlamp started to dim. The beam grew yellow, then orange, like a dying flashlight. Rule 5. I reached for my spare batteries, but Danny's voice stopped me. Not yet. Still counting down Rule 3. Battery change comes after. The darkness pressed closer. Shapes that might have been shadows moved at the edge of my vision, keeping pace with my truck even though we weren't moving. I focused on the clock, on the numbers, on Danny's steady breathing in my earpiece. 280 Mississippi, 281 Mississippi. Footsteps again, but closer now. Someone was walking the Hall Road behind my truck, boots crunching on gravel. Slow, even steps, like a night watchman making his rounds. I checked my mirrors, but saw only the empty road stretching back toward the scale house. 298 Mississippi, 299 Mississippi, 300. Time, Danny said. Now change those batteries. My hands shook as I fumbled with the battery compartment on my headlamp. The old batteries were stone cold, as if they'd been sitting in a freezer. The new ones clicked into place, and bright white light flooded the cab again. The dragline bucket sat exactly where it should, 30 yards away, boom angled toward the coal seam. No wet gleam, no open mouth. Just ordinary steel and cable, waiting for the day shift to bring it back to life. You okay over there, Winters? I keyed the radio. Yeah, I'm good. First time's always rough. You get used to it. Danny's truck started moving again, grinding up the exit ramp. Come on, we've got 6 more loads to haul before dawn. As I put my truck in gear, I glanced once more at the dragline. A man in a hard hat stood beside the bucket, hand raised in greeting. Company hard hat, reflective stripes catching my headlights. I lifted one hand from the wheel and waved back. Once, just like Rule 7 said. The figure nodded and walked away, disappearing behind the massive machine. Danny? I called over the radio. Yeah? How long has that guy been working here? The one by the dragline? A pause. Static. Then Danny's voice, careful and quiet. Since before the mine opened, Winters. Since before any of us got here. Just be glad he's friendly. We climbed toward the surface, 2 trucks heavy with coal, while behind us the pit settled back into its restless sleep. By 1:45 a.m., we'd completed 4 hauls. My shoulders ached from fighting the steering wheel on the rough roads, and coal dust had worked its way into every seam of my clothing. The routine felt familiar now. Load, climb, dump, repeat. But the rules cast everything in a different light. Every sound meant something. Every shadow might move. Danny's voice cut through the static. Radio check. How you holding up, partner? Good. Tired, but good. We'll take a break after this load. Park by the scale house, stretch our legs. Coffee's better up there anyway. I was backing toward the crusher when I heard it. Faint at first, like wind through cables, but growing clearer as my engine idled down. The old conveyor belt was running. The sound came from the abandoned section of the pit. A steady mechanical rhythm. Rubber belt moving over steel rollers. But that conveyor had been dead for 20 years. No power lines fed it. No motor turned its wheels. Danny, you hearing this? Yeah, Rule 4. Let it run its course. I climbed out of my cab, while Hank positioned the loader. The conveyor noise echoed off the pit walls, a ghost of industrial efficiency in the darkness. Through the maze of equipment and haul roads, I caught glimpses of the old belt actually moving. Not my imagination, not a trick of light and shadow, but genuine mechanical motion. How long does it usually run? Varies. Sometimes 5 minutes, sometimes an hour. Bobby Krinsky used to say it was finishing jobs from when it was still connected. Moving phantom loads nobody could see. The loader dumped coal into my truck bed with a crash that should have drowned out everything else, but I could still hear that belt running. Smooth and purposeful, like it knew exactly where it was going. Krinsky ever figure out what powered it? Nope. And he tried everything. Multimeters, circuit tracers, even brought in an electrician from Gillette. Belt just runs when it wants to run. I was climbing back into my cab when the conveyor stopped. The sudden silence felt heavier than the noise had been, like something holding its breath again. Hank gave me the thumbs up, and I put the truck in gear, but the quiet bothered me. Too complete, too final. We hauled our loads to the surface and dumped them at the preparation plant, then drove to the scale house for our break. The building was a single-wide trailer with coffee-stained windows and fluorescent tubes that buzzed like angry insects. Inside, a pot of coffee sat on a hot plate, thick as motor oil and twice as bitter. Danny poured 2 cups and handed me one. "You're doing good for your first night. Some guys don't make it past the dragline incident." What happened to them? They quit. Usually right after they see the bucket move. He sipped his coffee and made a face. Can't blame them. This work isn't for everyone. Through the window, I watched our trucks cooling down in the night air. Steam rose from their radiators, and their engines ticked as metal contracted. Beyond them, the pit stretched out like an open grave. Floodlights creating pools of harsh white against the darkness. Danny? Yeah? That guy by the drag line. Jake said he's been here longer than anyone. What's his story? Danny was quiet for a long moment. Name's William Hoffman. Worked here when this was still a surface mine in the 50s. Before they dug the pit. Before the drag line. When everything was strip shovels and small trucks. Company records show he died in a cave-in, October 1957. 70 years ago next month. My coffee suddenly tasted like ashes, and he's still walking around. Every night. Jake's seen him. I've seen him. You saw him tonight. Always wearing that old-style hard hat, always near heavy equipment. Never causes trouble. Never interferes with operations, just watches, makes sure things run smooth. A coyote howled somewhere out in the sagebrush, long and mournful. The sound made me think of empty spaces and things that belonged to an older Wyoming, before the mines and the trucks and the men like us who came here chasing paychecks. Time to head back, Danny said, checking his watch. Want to get 2 more loads before we hit the weird hours. Weird hours. 2 to 4 a.m. That's when things get interesting. We finished our coffee and walked back to the trucks. As I climbed into my cab, Danny called out, "Remember Rule 2 from here on out. Don't matter what you hear calling from down below. You just keep driving and keep your eyes on the road." The descent into the pit felt different this time. Darker. Despite the floodlights. The haul road seemed narrower, the walls closer. My radio crackled with static between our position reports, and I found myself gripping the wheel tighter than necessary. We were halfway to the bottom when I heard my name. Caleb. It came from below, from the deepest part of the pit, where the coal seam disappeared into shadow. A man's voice, clear and distinct, cutting through the engine noise and the radio chatter. "Caleb, down here." I reached for the radio to ask Danny if he'd heard it, but his voice came through first. "Keep driving, Winters. Don't stop. Don't look down. Don't acknowledge it." "But someone's..." "No," Danny said firmly. Nobody's down there. Pit bottom's been empty since the shift change. That's not a person calling your name. Caleb Winters. I'm waiting. The voice was familiar now, and that was the worst part. It sounded like my ex-wife's brother, Tom. The same tone he'd used when calling me in for dinner during family gatherings, before everything fell apart. But Tom lived in Colorado and had never set foot in Wyoming. Caleb, come down here. I have something to show you. My foot eased off the accelerator. The truck began to slow. Don't you do it. Danny's voice snapped through the radio. Whatever you're thinking, don't. Step on that gas and keep moving. The voice changed, became my father's. Son, I'm hurt. I need help. Please. But my father had been dead for 3 years, buried in a cemetery outside Cheyenne. I pressed the accelerator harder, and my truck lurched forward, diesel engine roaring. Caleb. Multiple voices now, a chorus calling from the pit bottom. My daughter, my ex-wife, old friends, dead relatives, all of them pleading, demanding, cajoling. Come down here, Caleb. We're waiting. We've been waiting so long. I kept my eyes on the road ahead, on Danny's taillights cutting through the darkness. The voices grew louder as we descended, more insistent, but I didn't look down. Couldn't look down. Rule 2 was absolute. At the bottom, we loaded our trucks in silence. The voices had stopped, but I could feel attention from the shadows. Patient, hungry things watching from the abandoned corners of the pit. Waiting for someone to break the rules. To step outside the protection that 70 years of night shift workers had carved out of this place. Good job, Danny said over the radio as we started our climb back to the surface. First time hearing the voices is always the hardest. What are they? Nobody knows, but they know us. They know our names, our families, our guilt. They know exactly what to say, to make us look down into the dark. As we reached the top of the pit, I glanced at my watch. 2:47 a.m. Still an hour and a half until dawn. Still plenty of time for the rules to save our lives. At 3:10 a.m., my truck developed a hydraulic leak. I noticed it during the climb out of the pit, steering getting heavy, pump whining under the hood. By the time I reached the dump site, I could barely turn the wheel. Red fluid dripped steadily from somewhere beneath the cab, pooling on the gravel like fresh blood. Danny, I've got problems up here. His voice came back tense. What kind of problems? Hydraulic failure. Power steering shot, maybe more. I'm losing fluid fast. Shut her down, I'll be right there. I killed the engine and climbed out. The leak was coming from the high-pressure line that fed the steering system, a clean slice through the rubber hose, too precise to be accidental wear. Someone had cut it. Recently. Danny's truck rumbled up beside mine, air brakes hissing. He hopped down and examined the damage with his flashlight beam. Son of a bitch, he muttered. That's sabotage. Who would do this? Nobody. That's the problem. He checked his watch, and his face went pale. Caleb, what time you got? I looked at my washboard clock. 3:15 a.m. We need to get you fixed and out of here in 2 minutes, Danny said, already pulling tools from his truck's side compartment. Emergency hose clamps in the maintenance shed. I'll grab them. You stuck the repair. Wait. I remembered Rule 6. Isn't that shed off limits between 3:17 to 3:23? I know. But if we don't fix this leak, you're stuck here until dawn, and your truck won't make it. He was already walking toward the shed, 50 yards away across the staging area. I'll be quick. The maintenance shed sat apart from the other buildings, a prefab metal structure with a single door and 2 windows. During my orientation, Jake had pointed it out as storage for emergency parts and backup equipment. What he hadn't mentioned was the way it seemed to crouch against the landscape, like something trying to make itself small. "Danny, don't do this," I called after him. "We can wait until 3:23. Figure something else out." But he was already at the door. I watched him trying to handle, saw it turn easily in his grip. The door swung open, revealing darkness beyond. Danny stepped inside, flashlight beam dancing across shelves of parts and tools. 3:16 a.m. I focused on the hydraulic line, trying to clean the cut-ins so they'd seal properly. My hands shook as I worked, partly from cold, partly from watching the clock count down. The mathematics of the situation were simple. Danny had 6 minutes to find the parts, get out, and help me complete the repair. 6 minutes before Rule 6 kicked in, and something happened that none of us understood, but all of us feared. From inside the shed came the sound of metal on metal. Danny moving equipment, searching through bins of spare parts. Normal sounds, working sounds. 3:17 a.m. The sounds stopped. I straightened up from my repair work and strained to listen. Nothing from the shed, no flashlight being moving behind the windows, no Danny calling out that he'd found what we needed. "Danny?" I shouted across the stage and area. "You okay in there?" Silence. 3:18 a.m. I grabbed my radio. "Danny, respond. You copy?" Static. Then faintly, Danny's voice. "Found the clamps. Be right out." But something was wrong with the transmission. The words came through clear enough, but they sounded flat, emotionless, like someone reading from a script. I looked toward the shed. The door stood open, but I couldn't see Danny's flashlight anymore. The windows were dark. If he was moving around in there, he was doing it without any light source. 3:19 a.m. "Danny, get out of there, now." "Almost done," came the reply. Same flat tone, like the voice was coming from somewhere far away. "Just need another minute." My hydraulic repair forgotten, I started walking toward the shed. Every instinct told me to stay away, to let Rule 6 run its course, and hope Danny would emerge at 3:23 unharmed. But instincts don't account for friendship, or the fact that Danny had spent the night keeping me alive in a place where the darkness had teeth. 3:20 a.m. 20 yards from the shed, I could see inside through the open door. Shelves lined the walls, filled with spare parts and maintenance supplies. A workbench dominated the center of the space, tools arranged in neat rows. Everything exactly as it should be, except Danny wasn't there. "Danny!" I called into the empty space. "Where are you?" No response on the radio, no sound from inside the shed. But as I watched, a wrench moved on the workbench, sliding 6 inches to the left, then stopping. A moment later, a can of hydraulic fluid tipped over, spilling its contents across the bench surface. 3:21 a.m. I took another step forward and saw them. Wet footprints leading from the workbench to a corner of the shed that looked deeper than it should be. The prints were Danny's boot size, but they glistened like they'd been made by someone walking through standing water. There was no water in the shed, just those wet marks disappearing into shadow that seemed too dark for the space it occupied. "Danny, if you can hear me, follow my voice. Come toward the door." Something moved in that deep corner, a shape that might have been a person, or might have been equipment draped with tarps. It was hard to tell from the doorway, hard to focus on. My eyes kept sliding away from it, like trying to look directly at the sun. 3:22 a.m. The radio crackled. "Caleb, stay back. Don't come in here." Danny's voice, but strained now, frightened. "Where are you? I can't see you." I'm I'm not sure. Everything looks different from in here. The shed's bigger than it was. Walls keep moving when I'm not looking at them. I checked my watch. 3:22:43. Less than 20 seconds until the rule window closed. Just stay put, I told him. 17 seconds and you can walk out. I don't think I can wait that long. Something's coming from the back of the shed. Something that sounds like work boots on concrete, but the footsteps are too heavy, too slow. 3:22:55. 10 seconds, Danny. It's almost here. I can smell it. Motor oil and old sweat. Like someone who's been working underground for years without seeing daylight. 3 hours, 22 minutes, 58 seconds. 5 seconds. Caleb, if I don't make it out. 3:23:00. The radio went silent. The shed door slammed shut with a bang that echoed across the staging area. I ran the final 20 yards and grabbed the handle, but it wouldn't turn. Locked tight, as if it had never been open at all. Danny? I pounded on the metal door. Danny, respond. Nothing. I circled the building, checking the windows, looking for another way in. Both windows were locked from inside, glass fogged with condensation that formed patterns like handprints pressed against the panes. My radio hissed with static, then cleared. Caleb, you still out there? Danny's voice, normal again. Tired but alive. Thank God. Where are you? Standing right behind you, partner. I spun around. Danny stood next to my broken truck, holding a package of hydraulic hose clamps. His flashlight worked fine, his radio was functioning, and he looked exactly like he had 10 minutes earlier, except for his boots. They were dry now, but I could see the faint outline of water stains on the leather. Salt marks, like he'd been walking through brine that had since evaporated. How'd you get out? I asked. Danny looked confused. Get out of where? I've been fixing your truck this whole time. Found the clamps in my own toolkit. Didn't need to go anywhere. I stared at the maintenance shed. The door stood open again, interior lit by overhead fluorescents that hummed softly in the night air. Everything normal. Everything as it should be. But I knew what I'd seen. And Danny's boots were still damp around the edges. We finished the hydraulic repair in 20 minutes. Danny worked with the efficiency of someone who'd done emergency maintenance countless times, but I noticed his hands trembling slightly as he tightened the hose clamps. Whether from cold or nerves, I couldn't tell. That should hold until morning, he said, wiping grease from his fingers with a shop rag. But we're behind schedule now. Need to make up time if we want to finish our loads before shift change. I checked my watch. 3:47 a.m. Less than 3 hours until the day crew arrived, and we still had 4 more hauls to complete. The breakdown had cost us precious time, but something else bothered me more than the schedule. Danny, about what happened at the shed. What about it? He avoided my eyes, focusing on packing his tools back into their carrying case. You really don't remember going inside? I told you already. Found the clamps in my own truck. Never went near that shed. But his voice carried the edge now, like someone defending a position they weren't entirely sure of. I let it drop. We had work to finish, and questioning Danny's memory wouldn't change what I'd witnessed. The wet boot prints, the locked door, the voice on the radio from inside an empty building. We drove back down into the pit, our headlights cutting through darkness that felt thicker than before. The walls seemed to press closer, and shadows moved at the periphery of vision. Shapes that might have been loose rock or equipment, but which seemed to watch our descent with patient interest. Radio check, Danny called as we reached the bottom. Copy, all good here. But it wasn't all good. My truck handled differently now, steering too sensitive, like the hydraulic pressure was running higher than specification. Every turn felt overcorrected, every adjustment too sharp. The repair had worked, but something about the system wasn't right. We loaded our trucks and began to climb toward the surface. Halfway up the switchback road, my steering wheel began to vibrate. Subtle at first, then increasingly violent, until the whole cab shook with each turn. "Danny, I'm getting vibration in the steering system." "How bad?" "Getting worse. Feels like the front end's coming apart." "Pull over at the next wide spot. I'll take a look." There was a maintenance pullout carved into the high wall about 100 yards ahead, just wide enough for 2 trucks to park side by side. I nursed my vehicle forward, fighting the steering wheel as the vibration grew worse. That's when I saw the man standing in the road. He wore a company hard hat and reflective safety vest, exactly like the figure I'd seen by the drag line earlier. But this time he wasn't beside heavy equipment. He stood directly in my path, arms at his sides, watching my truck approach with calm indifference. "Danny, you see him?" "See who?" "The guy in the road. Company hard hat, safety vest." Static crackled through the radio. "Caleb, there's nobody in that road." But I could see him clearly in my headlights, an older man with graying hair and deep-set eyes. He didn't move as my truck approached, didn't step aside, or acknowledge the 100-ton vehicle bearing down on him. I hit the brakes. The truck shuddered to a stop 50 feet from the figure. "What are you doing?" Danny's voice was sharp with concern. "There's a man standing right in front of me. I can't run him over." "Caleb, listen to me carefully. There is no one in that road. Check your mirrors. Look around. You're alone on that switchback." I checked the mirrors. Empty road behind me. I looked left and right. Just rock walls and shadows. But straight ahead, caught in my headlight beams, the man in the hard hat waited patiently. "He's right there, Danny. I can see his face." "That's not a person. Rule 7 says wave once and keep moving. You don't stop for him. You don't get out of your truck. You acknowledge him and drive through." The man tilted his head slightly, as if listening to our radio conversation. His mouth moved, forming words I couldn't hear over my idling engine. "What's he saying?" "He's not saying anything because he's not there. Now wave at whatever you think you're seeing and get moving." My hand felt like it weighed 50 pounds as I raised it from the steering wheel. The man in the road nodded once, stepped to the side, and vanished. Not walked away, vanished, like smoke dispersing in a breeze. I put the truck in gear and drove through the space where he'd been standing. The steering vibration had stopped completely. The hydraulic system felt normal, responsive, like it had never malfunctioned at all. "You okay up there?" Danny asked as I pulled into the maintenance area. "Yeah, steering's fine now." "Good. Let's take a look anyway. Make sure nothing's loose." We parked our trucks and climbed out. Danny's flashlight beam played across my front axle, checking tie rods and steering components. Everything looked normal. No loose bolts, no damaged parts, no sign of the violent vibration that had nearly shaken my teeth loose just minutes before. "Strange," Danny muttered. "Can't see anything wrong." I knelt beside the front tire and ran my hand along the tread. The rubber was warm to the touch, warmer than it should have been for a truck that had been climbing slowly up a graded road. And there, pressed into the sidewall like it had been branded with hot metal, was a handprint. Not made by a living person. The print was too deep, the fingers too long, and when I touched it, my skin came away smudged with something that looked like coal dust, but felt oily, organic. "Danny, look at this." He aimed his flashlight at the tire. The handprint was gone. Just normal rubber with the usual road wear and embedded grit. "Look at what?" I stared at the clean sidewall, then at my fingers. No smudge, no oily residue. just the calloused skin of a man who worked with his hands for a living. Never mind. Must have been a shadow. But as we walked back to our trucks, I caught Danny examining his own hands in the flashlight beam, like he was checking for something that shouldn't be there. We completed our next haul without incident, but the pit felt different now. More active. Sounds carried strangely in the cold air. Whispers that might have been wind through cables. Footsteps that could have been settling rock. The floodlights seemed dimmer, their beams not reaching as far into the darkness that pooled in the abandoned corners of the mine. "How many more loads?" I asked as we dumped our coal at the preparation plant. 2, maybe 3 if we push it. Danny's voice sounded tired. "Sun'll be up in 90 minutes. I looked east, toward where the horizon would eventually show the first hint of dawn. Nothing yet but star-filled darkness and the distant glow of Gillette's lights. The night felt endless, like we'd been driving these haul roads forever, trapped in a loop of loading and dumping while things watched from the shadows. On our way back down for the next load, my headlights picked up movement near the old conveyor belt. Something large was walking along the abandoned structure, keeping pace with the belt's phantom motion. The figure was too distant to make out clearly, but it moved with purpose, like someone performing a job they'd done thousands of times before. "Danny, you see that?" "See what?" "By the old conveyor. Someone's walking the belt line." Danny was quiet for a moment. "Yeah, I see him. That's just Charlie Moss. He used to work the belt back in the 90s, before they shut it down. Fell into the machinery during the storm. Belt caught him and pulled him through the gears before anyone could hit the emergency stop." "Is he dead?" "Oh yeah, 28 years now. But he still walks his route every night, checking for jams and belt tiers that aren't there anymore. Company policy was to walk the entire line every hour. Charlie never missed a check in 15 years of service." The figure disappeared behind a support structure, and I didn't see him again. "How many are there?" I asked. "How many dead people still work this mine?" "Enough," Danny said simply. "This is dangerous work, Caleb. Always has been. Cave-ins, equipment failures, bad air, explosions. Coal mining kills people. Some of them just don't stay dead." We loaded our trucks in silence, but as we began to climb to the surface, I found myself counting the figures I'd seen tonight. William Hoffman by the drag line. The man who'd stood in my path on the switchback. Charlie Moss walking the conveyor line. And somewhere in the maintenance shed, someone else. Someone who smelled like motor oil and old sweat. Someone who'd been working underground for years without seeing daylight. A graveyard shift in the most literal sense. At 4:23 a.m., Danny's radio went dead. We were descending into the pit for what should have been our final load when his voice simply cut out mid-sentence. Static replaced his words, then nothing. Not even the carrier wave that indicated an open channel. "Danny, you copy," I called into the growing silence. No response. Through my windshield, I could see his truck ahead of mine, headlights sweeping the switchback road as he navigated the turns. But when I tried his radio again, I got nothing but the kind of dead air that meant his unit wasn't transmitting at all. I keyed my mic to reach dispatch. "This is Winters. Lost contact with Yazzie. His radio's down." Static answered me. Then a voice that wasn't dispatch. "Caleb, why don't you come down here? We're all waiting." The transmission carried the voices I'd heard before. Family members, friends, people who had no business being in a Wyoming coal mine at 4:30 in the morning. But now there were more of them. A chorus that seemed to include everyone I'd ever known. I switched to the emergency channel. More voices. Different channel. Same result. They'd found a way into the radio system. turning our communication lifeline into another trap. Danny's truck reached the bottom of the pit and headed toward the loading zone. I followed, but something was wrong with his driving. He took the turns too sharp, accelerated too hard, like someone who wasn't familiar with the vehicle's handling characteristics, or like someone else was driving it entirely. At the crusher, Hank positioned the loader as usual, but when Danny backed his truck into loading position, he overshot the mark by 20 feet. The loader operator gestured for him to correct his position, but Danny sat motionless in his cab. I parked nearby and climbed out. "Danny, you need to reposition." He didn't respond. Through his windshield, I could see him sitting upright behind the wheel, hands in the proper position, but his head was tilted at an angle that suggested he was listening to something I couldn't hear. I walked around to his door and knocked on the window. Danny turned toward me and I saw his eyes. They reflected my flashlight beam like an animal's, throwing back cold light that had nothing human in it. "Danny? You okay?" His mouth moved, but no sound came out. His lips formed words I couldn't understand. Not English, not any language I recognized. Ancient syllables that seemed to come from somewhere deep underground, where men hadn't walked in millions of years. "Danny, talk to me." He blinked once, slowly, and his eyes were normal again. Confused, frightened. "Caleb? What happened? Why am I down here?" "You drove down. Don't you remember?" He looked around the loading zone like he'd never seen it before. "I remember starting the descent, then nothing." "How long was I out?" "Maybe 10 minutes. 10 minutes? Danny climbed out of his cab, legs unsteady. "I don't remember any of it. The last thing I recall is your radio cutting out at the top of the pit." My radio hadn't cut out, his had. But I didn't correct him. Hank approached us, shaking his head. "You boys having problems? Danny here's been acting strange, backing up without signals, ignoring my directions." "Radio trouble," I said. "We'll sort it out." But as Hank walked back to his loader, I noticed something that made my skin crawl. The coal dust around Danny's truck showed multiple sets of footprints, some from Danny's boots, some from mine, but others too. Smaller prints, like a child's shoes, and a set of prints so large they could only have been made by someone wearing boots 2 sizes bigger than any normal man would need. We loaded our trucks and began the climb out of the pit. Danny drove normally now, maintaining proper spacing and taking the turns at safe speeds. But I kept watching his taillights, looking for any sign that whatever had taken control of him might return. Halfway up the Hall Road, my headlamp started to dim. The beam grew yellow, then orange, just like it had earlier in the night. But this time, when I reached for my spare batteries, my fingers found the compartment empty. I'd used my backups hours ago and forgotten to restock from the equipment locker. "Danny, my headlamp's dying." No response. His radio was still dead. The light faded to a weak amber glow, barely illuminating the road ahead. Shadows pressed in from both sides, deeper and more solid than they should have been. Rule 5 was clear. Replace the batteries immediately when the headlamp dims. Dark spots move. I was fumbling in my toolkit, hoping for forgotten batteries, when I saw them. The dark spots weren't moving. They were dancing. Along the high wall to my left, patches of absolute darkness swirled and leaped like flame shadows thrown by a campfire. But there was no fire here, no light source to cast such patterns. The darkness moved independently, flowing across the rock face in spirals and whirls that hurt to look at directly. One of the spots detached itself from the wall and drifted toward my truck. As it approached, my cab grew cold. Not winter cold, but the deep chill of underground places where sunlight had never reached. The spot hovered outside my driver's side window, pulsing like a heartbeat made of shadow. I found 2 AA batteries at the bottom of my toolbox, corroded and old, but still carrying some charge. As I fumbled them into my headlamp, the dark spot pressed against the glass. Where it touched, frost began to form, spreading outward in crystalline patterns. The headlamp flickered to life. Weak light, but enough to reveal what the dark spot really was. A face. Human features pressed against my window from the outside, flattened by the glass, eyes wide and mouth open in a soundless scream. The face of someone who'd been buried alive, trapped beneath tons of coal and rock, trying to claw their way back to the surface. I gunned the engine. My truck lurched forward, and the face slid away from the window, leaving behind streaks of condensation that looked like desperate fingerprints. But there were more of them now. Dark spots moving along both sides of the haul road, keeping pace with my truck. Some were just shadows, patches of moving darkness that defied explanation. Others showed glimpses of human shapes, arms reaching, mouths calling, eyes pleading for help that would never come. The mine's casualties. Everyone who'd ever died in these tunnels and pits, drawn to the light like moths to flame. I caught up with Danny at the top of the pit. He sat in his truck, engine idling, staring at something I couldn't see. "Danny!" I called through my open window. He turned toward me, and for a moment, his face was overlaid with another. An older man with deep lines around his eyes and coal dust permanently embedded in his skin. Bobby Krensky, maybe, or William Hoffman, or any of the dozen other men who died here over the years. Then Danny blinked, and he was himself again. "We need to get out of here," he said, his voice carrying clearly despite his broken radio. "Something's wrong tonight, more wrong than usual." I looked at my watch. 4:47 a.m. 13 minutes until shift change. 13 minutes until the day crew arrived, and we could leave this place to its ghosts and shadows. "One more load," I said. "No." Danny's voice was firm. "We're done. I don't care what the production numbers say. We're not going back down there." But as we sat at the edge of the pit, engines idling in the pre-dawn darkness, I heard something that changed everything. A child crying. The sound came from somewhere deep in the pit, echoing off the walls and rising through the still air. Not the mechanical noise of equipment, not the wind through cables. A child's voice, lost and frightened, calling for help. "You hear that?" I asked. Danny nodded, his face pale in the dashboard lights. "That's Sarah McKinney. She was 8 years old when she fell into the old shaft back in 2003. They never found her body." The crying continued, desperate and heartbroken. Every parental instinct I'd ever felt screamed at me to go down there, to find that child and bring her to safety. "We have to help her," I said. "No," Danny replied. "We don't. That's not a child anymore, Caleb. That's something else wearing her voice like a mask." But I was already putting my truck in gear. "Don't do this," Danny said as I started down the haul road. "Whatever you think you're going to find down there, it's not what you expect." But the crying had gotten worse, more desperate, more human. A little girl lost in the dark, calling for her mommy. Every instinct I had as a father overrode the rules Jake Morrison had given me. Some things mattered more than following protocols written by frightened men. "I'll be quick," I called back. "Just check the old shaft area. Caleb, you're breaking Rule 1. Never work alone past midnight." "It's almost 5 a.m. Sun will be up soon." "That makes it worse, not better. The closer we get to dawn, the more desperate they become." But I was already halfway down the switchback road, my truck's headlights cutting through darkness that seemed thicker than oil. In my mirrors, I watched Danny's taillights disappear as the pit walls blocked my view of the surface. The crying echoed from somewhere near the abandoned section of the mine. The old workings that predated the current pit, where narrow shafts dropped into the earth like the throat of some buried giant. Sarah McKinney had fallen into one of those shafts 20 years ago during a family picnic when her father had worked for the previous mining company. The shaft was supposed to be covered, capped with steel plates and warning signs. But 8-year-old girls find ways around barriers that adults think are secure. I parked near the old conveyor belt and climbed out. The crying was louder now, coming from a cluster of concrete structures that marked the entrance to the original mineworks. My flashlight beam picked out rusted warning signs. Danger, abandoned mine, keep out. Sarah? I called into the darkness. Sarah, can you hear me? The crying stopped. In the sudden quiet, I could hear my heartbeat and the distant hum of electrical equipment from the active part of the mine. Then faintly, help me. I'm scared. The voice came from an opening between two concrete barriers, a gap just wide enough for a child to slip through. My flashlight beam disappeared into the opening without hitting a back wall. The old shaft dropped away into depths that might have been 50 feet or 500. Where are you, sweetheart? Keep talking so I can find you. Down here, it's dark, and I can't get out. I knelt at the edge of the opening and aimed my light downward. The beam illuminated rough stone walls and support timbers that looked ready to collapse. About 30 feet down, a ledge jutted from the shaft wall. Something white lay crumpled on it, a small form that could have been a child. I see you, Sarah. I'm going to help you. But as I watched, the white form shifted, turned, looked up at me with eyes that reflected my flashlight beam like wet glass. Not Sarah McKinney, not human at all. The thing on the ledge unfolded itself, revealing limbs too long for a child's body and fingers that ended in points. Its face was pale as bone, with features that seemed carved rather than grown. When it smiled, its teeth were black as the coal seam that surrounded us. "Come down here, Caleb," it said in Sarah's voice. "Come play with me." I scrambled backward from the opening, but my flashlight beam stayed fixed on the creature. It began to climb, moving up the shaft wall with spider-like grace. Its fingers found purchase on stone that should have been smooth, and it ascended toward me with patient inevitability. "Danny," I called into my radio, forgetting that his unit was dead. "Danny, I need help." Static answered me, then a new voice. My daughter's voice. "Daddy, why did you leave me? Why don't you visit anymore?" "That's not my daughter," I said aloud, as much to convince myself as to defy whatever was manipulating the radio waves. "Daddy, I'm lonely. Mommy says you don't love us anymore." The creature reached the opening. Its head emerged from the shaft, like a pale flower blooming in reverse, eyes fixed on mine with predatory interest. "Your daughter misses you," it said, still using Sarah McKinney's voice. "She cries herself to sleep every night, wondering why Daddy moved so far away." I backed toward my truck but stumbled over loose rock. The creature flowed out of the shaft opening like liquid shadow, taking a more human shape as it moved. By the time it stood upright, it looked almost like an 8-year-old girl, if you didn't look too closely at the eyes or notice how its shadow moved independently of its body. "I know what you did," it said. "The real reason you left Colorado. The real reason your wife won't let you see your daughter alone anymore. That's not the accident at the park. Little Emma Rodriguez, playing on the swings while you were supposed to be watching the children. You looked away for just a minute, just long enough. The words hit me like physical blows. Emma Rodriguez had been in my daughter's playgroup. 6 years old. The swing set had been old, chains rusted weak. When it collapsed, she'd fallen wrong, hit her head on the concrete border around the playground equipment. "She died because you weren't paying attention," the creature continued, circling me like a predator. "Because you were texting your lawyer about the divorce instead of watching the children. And now your ex-wife knows what kind of father you really are. It wasn't my fault. Wasn't it? Emma's parents think it was. The other parents think it was. Even your own daughter thinks it was." The creature's face began to change, features shifting like clay in warm hands. For a moment, it looked like Emma Rodriguez. Then my daughter. Then my ex-wife. Finally, it settled on my own face. My features reflected back at me with accusation in the eyes. "That's why you came here," it said in my own voice. "Running from guilt. Hiding in a place where nobody knows what you did. But the dead know, Caleb. The dead always know." Behind me, my truck's engine coughed and died. The headlights flickered once and went dark. My radio hissed with static, then voices, hundreds of them, maybe thousands. Everyone who'd ever died in these mines, calling my name, demanding justice for sins both real and imagined. "Join us," the creature said. "Stay here where you belong, where men like you always end up." That's when Danny's truck roared over the crest of the Hall Road. His headlights blazed through the darkness, and the creature flinched away from the sudden illumination. It began to collapse back toward its original form, pale, angular, more insect than human. "Get in!" Danny shouted through his open window. I ran for his truck and dove through the passenger door as he gummed the engine. Behind us, the creature let out a sound like steam escaping from a broken pipe. Fury and hunger mixed with disappointment. "How?" I gasped as we climbed toward the surface. "Your radio was dead." "Radio's still dead, but I could hear you screaming from up top." Danny's knuckles were white on the steering wheel. "What did it show you?" "Things I'd rather forget." "They always do. That's how they feed. On guilt, regret, shame, all the things that drive men to places like this." We reached the rim of the pit as the eastern sky began to lighten. First hint of dawn, painting the horizon pale gray. The night shift was officially over. Will it follow us? No, daylight kills them, or sends them back underground. We're safe until tomorrow night. I looked back at the pit one last time. In the growing light, it looked like nothing more than an industrial excavation. Rocks and roads and heavy equipment. But I knew what waited in the dark corners, what walked the abandoned sections when the sun went down. "I'm turning in my notice," I said. Danny nodded. "Most guys do, after their first real encounter. The ones who don't." He shrugged. "Well, they usually don't last long anyway." We drove toward the surface facilities as the day crew began arriving. Fresh faces, clean clothes, men who worked in the safety of daylight and never had to follow rules they didn't understand. Lucky bastards. I submitted my resignation that morning before I'd even showered off the coal dust. Jake Morrison took the news with the same expression he'd worn when handing me those 7 rules. Unsurprised, maybe a little disappointed, but understanding. He'd seen this before. "The mine's not for everyone," he said, filing my paperwork. "No shame in knowing your limits." But there was shame, wasn't there? That's what the creature had fed on, down in the darkness of that abandoned shaft. The guilt I'd carried from Colorado, the weight of Emma Rodriguez's death, the knowledge that I'd failed when it mattered most. Danny found me in the parking lot, loading my gear into my pickup truck. His face was gray with exhaustion, eyes red-rimmed from a shift that had lasted too long and shown us both things we'd rather forget. "You sure about this?" he asked. "Yeah, I'm sure. There's other work around here. Day shift at the preparation plant, equipment maintenance, office stuff, if you can stand being indoors." I shook my head. "It's not about the work, Danny. It's about what I saw down there, what it knew about me." Danny leaned against my truck's tailgate. "Thing about guilt, it follows you wherever you go. Can't outrun it by changing jobs. Maybe not. But I can stop feeding it." We stood in silence for a moment, watching the day shift workers heading toward their assignments. Normal people doing normal work, unaware of what waited for them when darkness fell. Part of me envied them their ignorance. "You ever going to tell anyone about this?" Danny asked. "Who would believe it?" "Fair point." He straightened up, extending his hand. "Take care of yourself, Caleb. And for what it's worth, you did good tonight. Not many guys would have come back for me at that maintenance shed." I shook his hand. "Thanks for pulling me out of that shaft. That's what partners do." I drove south toward Cheyenne, then east toward Nebraska. By noon, I was through Ogallala, watching cornfields roll past under a sky so blue it hurt to look at directly. Normal sky, daylight sky. No shadows that moved independently, no voices calling from places they shouldn't be. The guilt was still there, riding passenger seat like an unwelcome hitchhiker. Emma Rodriguez's death, the collapse of my marriage, the daughter who flinched when I tried to hug her goodbye. The creature in the mine hadn't created those wounds. It had simply pressed its fingers into them and twisted. But now I understood something I hadn't before. Guilt was a choice, same as everything else. I could carry it like a stone in my chest, let it drag me down into dark places where things fed on shame and regret. Or I could set it down, do the work of making amends, and find a way to live with what I'd done. I stopped at a truck stop outside North Platte and used the payphone to call my ex-wife. "It's me," I said when she answered. "Caleb? Where are you calling from?" "This number, double quote. I'm driving back to Colorado. I want to see Anna, and I want to talk to Emma's parents, if they'll see me." Silence on the line. Then, "What's changed?" "Everything," I wanted to say. I'd spent a night in a place where the dead don't rest, where guilt takes physical form and hunts you through abandoned mine shafts. I'd learned that some rules exist for good reasons, and that breaking them has consequences beyond what any safety manual could describe. Instead, I said, "I'm ready to stop running from what happened. I'm ready to face it." "Okay," she said quietly. "Come home, Caleb. We'll figure it out." I hung up the phone and walked back to my truck. Behind me, Wyoming stretched toward the horizon, a state full of coal and wind and places where men go to hide from themselves. I was done hiding.